On Flip the Frame. What does BRM need from AI? We are very, very excited for this conversation with Jasbir. And before we get into it, though, we do have a few general housekeeping items, events. There's some big things coming up. Just a gentle reminder as to what our shared purpose is through the Institute and as a single global BRM community. The shared purpose is to improve ourselves, our organizations, and our world by connecting relationships to results. And this sounds like a broken record, but never has that been more true than in today's day and age. And what better of a conversation could we be having around the importance of relationships? As far as upcoming events, there are some good ones. First of all, today's webinar will be hosted by Jasbir, and we've had tremendous.
Somebody kicked him out. No, take her.
Appreciate that. But yes, very excited for today's conversation. We've had a lot of registrants for today's webinar. Obviously, it is not only a hot topic, but an enduring topic and one that is vital for our BRM roles, our teams, and our organizations moving forward. Coming up next month, in just a few weeks, the mindset shift that everyone needs. This is going to be hosted by Alexander Suarez, who actually had the wonderful pleasure of running into at a cafe in Puerto Rico just off the cuff during BRM Connect when it was hosted back in Puerto Rico a couple of years ago. So she is an absolutely wonderful person, an innovative thinker, and we're very excited for her to bring this type of innovation to thinking big as a BRM. Of course, upcoming training, we do have the BRMP coming up in July, BRM Fundamentals course in June, as well as a CBRM course in June as well. And just a reminder that these are powerful ways to help yourselves not only get noticed, but to bring more credibility to your role, your capability, and the teams that you are a part of. Quick tips for success when using Teams. I think we've all been around and aware of this for long enough, but it's just important to please mute yourself when you're not speaking. I do encourage you all to turn on your camera if you would like. Just always lovely to see faces, feel the community that is going around, especially when engaging in any conversations too. Of course, you may raise your hand and or chat to interact. During the chat, we tend to collect questions and be able to share those with our presenters throughout or towards the end. So get your questions in early and we'll make sure to get to them. We also do not allow AI chatbots or recordings during these webinars. So if you have one come on automatically, please be mindful of that and remove it. Otherwise, it may be removed from the session as well. This will be recorded, posted on the BRM Institute online campus. If you're not a member, highly recommend becoming a member of the Single Global BRM community. And in terms of exciting events, I am here in Denver, so very excited to be hosting all of you. Those of you who will be coming to BRM Connect in September. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers, sessions, workshops, as well as just community activities to help all of you lean a little bit more into the human element. And without further ado, I am going to get us started and introduce Jasbir Kooner, who has been a leader in the BRM community for quite some time, and not only in the community itself, but is a pioneer, honestly, in the realm of AI, as well as the intersection of AI and business relationship management. So without further ado, Jasbir, I would love to pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me today. And thank you to you all for actually joining. And I know right now there's probably a million things that's pulling your attention right now. So the fact that you've carved out this hour for us to be together, that really does mean a lot. And it also shows that you're paying attention to what's happening, and what's happening right now really does matter, especially for us BRMs. So this webinar what I wanted to really focus on is what last time I did the webinar, we had touched upon on what does AI need from BRM, and now we kind of flipped that frame that we had last year to what does BRM need from AI. So now some of you might have been with me last year when I did that webinar, and we talked about the importance of relationships in the AI era, how AI initiatives succeed or fail, not because of technology, but because of the people around it. And this is where we really look at trust, the buy-in, the alignment, all of that human stuff that doesn't show up in a project plan, but it absolutely determines the outcome. So this message did resonate with a lot of individuals, and I still stand by every word of it. But this year, again, I want to flip the frame. So we kind of look at it from a different perspective. So last year was about what AI needs from us. This year, I want to talk about what we need from AI. And I know that sounds like it's a big going into the technology talk. And I'm actually going to walk you through tools and platforms and prompt engineering, touch upon it, but that's not what this webinar is about. So the spoiler here is that BRM's need from AI has almost nothing to do with the technology itself. It has everything to do with the technology reveals about us, about our role, about our value, and also about the future that it actually needs from us. So that's kind of what we're going to be getting into today. Next slide, Tom, or I don't know who's actually handling it.
I believe Mariah's
Perfect.
driving.
Mariah, okay, perfect. So wanted to really start with a level set today and spend some time here to really concentrate on, before we go anywhere, to really concentrate on making sure that we're all on the same page, because I think it's worth stepping back and reminding ourselves what we actually do, not the job description, not the framework, but of what we actually do day in and day out. Many of us sit between business and technology. We're the ones who walk into a room full of business leaders and help them understand what technology can do for them. And then we walk into a room full of technologists and we help them understand what the business can do. So we're there to translate, to connect, to build bridges between people who speak different languages, even though they work for the same organization. So in a lot of ways, we are strategists. We look at where the business is headed and we figure out how technology investments can support the direction. We're facilitators. We bring people together who wouldn't otherwise be in the same room. And above everything else, we're relationship builders. And that's not a soft, fluffy thing. That's hard. It's strategic. And especially today in the aspect of AI, I do feel that it's even more important than before. And it's essential for businesses to succeed as well as for strategies to succeed. So that's who we are now. And what I want to do now is talk about what AI can do. And I mean right now. So I'm not talking about 2 years ago what AI could do, because AI is evolving so fast. And I also don't want to look at a theoretical future, because right now, with the aspect of it moving so fast, we can't really know where the future is going to go. So again, in that context, the webinar is focused on today, current, what's going on. So what do we know about AI? We know that it can write a strategy document. It can analyze a data set in seconds, and that would take a human analyst days. It can summarize hundreds of pages of stakeholder feedback and pull out the key themes. It can build a business case. It can draft a communication plan. It can predict trends based on historical data, and it can sit in a meeting, a virtual meeting, and produce a summary with action items before we've even left the room. So it's fast. And let's be honest with ourselves for a second. Some of what I just described here, that stuff we used to spend a lot of time on: research, synthesis, documentation, reporting, and those tasks used to take hours, sometimes even days, and now they can be done in minutes. And here's what I think about it. AI is raising the floor, and at the same time, it's raising the ceiling. So this is kind of what the focus of this webinar was, where when it's raising the floor, there's fear around that. But when the ceiling is also getting raised, that's where potential comes in. That's where innovation, creativity, and evolution within our roles really comes in. And that's where I want to focus the webinar on today. So the floor is raising because the basic stuff, coordination, communication, reporting, synthesis, that's becoming table stakes. Everyone's able to do it. Anyone can do that with AI now, but the ceiling is also rising because there's now enormous value in the human who can build trust, hold complexity, and make judgment calls that no model should be making. So the question isn't whether AI changes our role. It's going to change everyone's role. I don't believe that there's a role that AI will not change. The question that we're looking at today is really, are we moving towards the ceiling, or are you spending a lot of time defending the floor? Now, I'm not saying that to scare anyone today. I'm saying it because if we're not honest about this, we can't have a real conversation about what comes next. And that's kind of where I want this webinar to go, is looking into the future, looking into how we evolve into our roles. So here, the question I want you to sit with is, if AI can handle the analytical, the transactional, the informational parts of your work, what's left? What is the thing that we do that AI simply cannot do? And when I say in that aspect of what AI cannot do, there's a lot of stuff within organizations that we don't want AI to do. This is where human in the loop is so important for AI, where technically we don't want AI to perform a full process from start to end, because right now, I would say a lot of companies are not ready for that. And this is where we need to know what AI can do, where the human comes in to make sure what AI did is accurate. And at the end, right now, with everything that we're doing, the human is still the one that's held accountable. So for instance, you can run an analysis, create a strategy with an AI, but at the end, if you're sending it out or if you're presenting it, it's still on you. It's your name that's going to be on that email. It's your name that's going to be on that strategy. So this is where it becomes really important that we kind of take all of that into context. So this is where what's left is the thing that we do that AI simply cannot do. And that's where it gets really interesting, because the answer isn't what most people think it is. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'd already covered the level set. We're on to the next slide. So the gap that nobody's talking about. So go to any conference right now, read any LinkedIn post, listen to any podcast. What everyone's talking about is pretty much what AI can do. AI capabilities, AI strategy, AI transformation, how to implement AI, how do we scale AI? That seems to be the theme for this year, is all organizations are talking about scale. And a lot of times what gets forgotten is how to govern AI, but that should be something that we are also considering. And all of this stuff, it's really important. So it needs to be addressed. But what I'm seeing is that almost nobody is talking about what AI is quietly taking away. And by this, I don't mean the jobs. I'm not here to have that debate today. I mean something more subtle than that, something that most organizations won't notice until it's already gone. I'm talking about the human fabric that makes organizations actually work, the invisible threads that hold everything together. And within that aspect, what I'm looking at is trust. I'm looking at context, and I'm looking at connection. So AI is creating 3 gaps that are widening every single day. And I believe that BRMs are the only people within an organization who are positioned to fill them. IT won't be able to fill it, business will not be able to fill it, and there's not going to be any data science team that's able to do that. I believe that this is on us as BRMs, and we are the perfect individuals within an organization, the perfect role to be able to really fill this gap that's being created. So what I wanted to do is, during the webinar, I wanted to really walk through these 3 different gaps that are being created. Next slide. So the first gap that we're looking at is the trust gap. So here, AI can produce a perfect recommendation. And I mean, technically, it's perfect. It's a beautiful data visualization. You have clear logic, compelling narrative, the type of output that on paper should make a decision easily. But here's what I've learned after years of sitting in these rooms where decisions get made. People do not act on logic. They actually act on trust. So a lot of times you could get all of the data, you could run all of these models, you could come up with a perfect scenario, and you'll have someone in the C-suite into the leadership that'll say, hey, this just doesn't work. I want to go this way, right? So think about this. Have you ever been in a meeting where someone presents data, they have solid data in that aspect, and the room just doesn't buy it? Not because the data is wrong, the data is actually fine, but because they don't trust the source, or they don't trust the process that produced it, or they don't trust the person presenting it, or they don't trust the agenda behind it. So in that context, what we want to look at is we've all been there. We've all seen good ideas die because the trust wasn't there. Now multiply that by AI. An algorithm made this recommendation, a model that nobody in the room fully understands produced this analysis. Who validated it? Who pressure tested it against our reality? Who's accountable if we follow this recommendation and if it's wrong? So that's the trust gap. And it's getting wider every day as organizations push more AI-generated insights into their decision-making process. So AI can produce it, but it cannot make people believe what they produce. It cannot put its reputation on the line, and it cannot look a VP in the eye and say, I vetted this, it's stress tested, I believe in this recommendation, and here's why. So that's what trust requires. Right now, trust requires a human being who has built credibility, who has track record, who has invested in the relationship, putting themselves behind the insight. So I believe that that's the BRM. That's us. We are the trust layer between AI and action. And if we don't step into that role, those AI-generated insights are going to pile up into dashboards that nobody looks at and reports that nobody acts on. So the technology will work perfectly. And at the end, nothing is really going to change at organizations. Next slide, please. So the next gap is the interpretation gap. AI is phenomenal at telling us what is happening. It can crunch numbers, identify patterns, surface anomalies. Some of the more advanced models can even give you a pretty good explanation of why something is happening. So for that, for anybody that's using the models, it's the thinking models that take longer, and it'll actually take you through step by step on how they're coming out with a conclusion. So what AI absolutely cannot do, it cannot tell you that what something means for your organization right now, given your culture, your politics, and your history. So let me give you an example here. Say AI analyzes your employee engagement data and flags that morale is dropping significantly in the engineering department. There's clear signal, the data is solid. AI might even surface some correlations. Maybe it's tied to recent overtime trends or a spike in turnover. But do you know what AI doesn't know? What AI doesn't know is that the engineering just went through a leadership change 3 months ago and people are still adjusting. It doesn't know that there's a turf war happening between two VPs that are creating tensions across the department. And it doesn't know that the last person who raised the moral concern in the department got quietly sidelined and everyone saw it happen. AI doesn't know any of that. It would be us as the BRMs that would pick up these signals and have that understanding that AI does not have. The interpretation gap is the space between insight and understanding. So AI is able to give you the insight and the BRM gives you the understanding, and without understanding, insight is just noise. So think about how much of your value as a BRM comes from the fact that you know the backstory, you know who's aligned with who, you know which initiatives have political support and which ones are being tolerated. You know the unspoken rules, the unwritten history, the things that never make it into a Slack channel or a status report. That's organizational intelligence, and no AI model, no matter how sophisticated they get, have access to it because it lives in relationships and it lives in hallway conversations and lunch meetings and years of being present in the organization and also having trust with the teams that you're working with and with the individuals for them to be able to share some of this stuff with the BRM. So that's our superpower as BRMs. And in an age where organizations are drowning in AI-generated insights, the person who can interpret these insights through the lens of the organization's reality is worth their weight in gold. So this is where the interpretation gap, there will be no AI model that will be able to do it to the level that a human would be able to do it. And we are in the perfect position to be able to really fill this gap. Next slide, please. So the third gap that I'm seeing is the connection gap. So this is a sneaky one that a lot of individuals do not see. And this is the one that's happening right under our eyes, and almost nobody is naming it. So we kind of see it happening and no one's really able to identify it yet. And I think this is just because AI is still so new to individuals and organizations. So think about how much of your relationship building used to happen because of the work, not in spite of it. So you'd walk over to someone's desk to get a piece of data. While you're there, you chat for 5 minutes. You learn that the team is struggling with a new system rollout, and suddenly you're connected to a problem you can help solve. You'd schedule a meeting to align on priorities, and in that meeting, you'd pick up on body language, on tone, on things people aren't saying. You'd grab coffee with a stakeholder to talk through a business case. And by the end of the coffee, you've strengthened a relationship that's going to matter 6 months from now when something goes sideways. So AI is removing those reasons to interact. The data is being automated, the summaries are being generated, the business case is actually writing itself in certain ways, and the meeting gets replaced by an AI generated brief. So the hallway conversation never happens because the information showed up on a dashboard. And on the surface, that does look like efficiency, and that does look like progress. We are saving time, we're streamlining, we're optimizing, but here's what's not being optimized. It's alignment, buy-in, shared understanding, the feeling that we're in this together and we're heading in the same direction. Those things don't happen through automation. They actually happen through conversation. They happen through presence, through the simple, irreplaceable act of being in a room with another human being and actually listening. And that's one of the key aspects, is the art of listening is going to become much more valuable going forward. So we've got this paradox where we have more information is flowing through the organization than ever before, but there's less human connection, more output, there's less understanding, there's more data, and there's less meaning to that data. So that's the connection gap that I'm starting to see, and it's widening every single day as organizations adopt more AI, automate more workflows, and remove more of the friction that used to bring people together. So most organizations don't see it yet. They will eventually. And when they do, they're going to look around for the people who know how to rebuild connection in an automated world. And again, BRM, that's us. If we're paying attention, we're going to be the ones within our organizations to actually fill in this gap that no one's really seeing right now. Next slide, please. So this is where I want to kind of shift, where, all right, we looked at the floor is getting high, the floor is coming up, the ceiling is getting higher. We see these three gaps, and what are the skills that we need for the future as BRMs? So if these three gaps are real, the trust gap, the interpretation gap, the connection gap, and I believe they are very real and they are very much growing. And again, I'm going to say organizations don't see it yet, but it is going to catch up to them in the next 6 months to 1 year. So what does this mean for the BRM? What does it demand of us? Here's what I think. I think it means that skills that have been treated as nice to haves are now the main event, not secondary. They're not supplementary. They're actually going to be primary. And these are the skills that are going to help to define the future role of the BRMs. So what I wanted to do here is take a couple minutes to really speak about them. The first is empathy, and I don't mean empathy in the greeting card sense. I mean the ability to genuinely understand what another person is experiencing, what they're worried about, what they're hoping for, what's keeping them up at night, not just what they're saying in a meeting, but what they're not saying, what's underneath the words. And again, an AI tool will not be able to pick that up. Next is the trust gap. So empathy is how you know that a stakeholder isn't resisting AI because they're old-fashioned. They're resisting it because they're afraid of being made irrelevant. When you understand that, you can address the real issue. AI can't do that. AI doesn't feel fear. It doesn't understand what it means to worry about your job or your relevance. And this is, again, where the BRM role is the one that will be able to understand that. Then we look at it from the aspect of influence. And this is influence without authority. This has always been core to the BRM role, and it's about to become even more critical. As AI takes over more of the information and analytical work, the BRM's value shifts entirely to the ability to move people, not with a mandate, not with a title, but with credibility, with trust, with the strength of the relationship. So can you walk into a room where people disagree and help them find a path forward? Can you get a skeptical executive to give an AI initiative a chance, not because they have data, but because they trust your judgment? That's influence, and that's a skill that no AI will ever be able to replicate. Third is the importance of storytelling. And I'm not talking about putting together a nice slide deck. I'm talking about the ability to take complex, technical, data-heavy information and turn it into something that lands emotionally, something that makes people care. A lot of what we're seeing nowadays is AI is outputting a lot of stuff, and we're looking at individuals that are actually having a really hard time to go through everything that's being presented to them. So one of the things I always tell individuals is, if AI can create a 30-page strategy, that doesn't mean that you need to use a 30-page strategy into your meeting, right? You can turn that 30 pages into a 2-pager or a 3-pager. And this is where an AI output should not be the final output. It should always go through what you know that the organization needs. It needs to be made specific to that. So this is where it's essential into that storytelling aspect. Is no AI tool will be able to tell a story as well as a BRM is able to tell that story for their organization. So in that aspect, AI can give you the data, it can give you an analysis, it can even give you a summary, but it cannot tell the story of what that means to your team, for your customers, for our future, in a way that makes people lean forward in their chairs. That's storytelling, and right now that's very human. That's not an AI tool. Next is conflict navigation, not conflict resolution. I'm being specific here, navigation, because sometimes conflict doesn't need to be resolved. Sometimes it needs to be sat in, understood, and worked through over time. The ability to hold space for competing priorities, to sit in the tension between what the business wants and what technology can deliver, to help people with fundamentally different perspectives find enough common ground to move forward. That's an incredible, valuable, and deeply human skill. So this is where conflict navigation is not something a tool will be able to do. And this is where it's on the BRM and within our teams that we really realize on how does that look into the future, where we have tools and humans working together. And then we spoke earlier about active listening, and this is really listening, not waiting for your turn to talk, not formulating your response while the other person is still speaking, but actually hearing what someone is telling you, and just as importantly, hearing what they're not telling you. And in the connection gap, active listening is how you build the human fabric that AI is quietly eroding. When you listen to someone, really listen, you make them feel seen, you make them feel valued, you create connection, and that connection is the foundation for everything else. It aligns with trust, with alignment, with buy-in, as well as with collaboration. And last is critical thinking. And I think this is one of the most important ones. And in this aspect, I'd say that a lot of us older individuals, we grew up without AI. Some of us are older than Google, and we didn't use technology our whole lives. So we do have that muscle of critical thinking. And I'm starting to see that we're tending to lose it because we're leaving a lot to the tool. And in that aspect, on your teams, if you have younger individuals, interns that are coming more Gen Z, digital natives, critical thinking may not be a muscle that they've developed to the degree that we were forced to develop before tech took over. And this is where for BRMs, it's really important for us to understand this aspect. So this one might be the most important for all in the AI era, Because AI is confident, it gives you answers that sound right, that sound polished, that feel authoritative, and most people accept them at face value. The BRM who can pause and say, wait, what's missing here? What assumptions did this model make? Did this actually hold up against what we know about our organization? That person's going to be invaluable. So critical thinking is what makes AI honest. It's what turns you from someone who passes along AI output to someone who curates, challenges, and validates it. And that's a completely different level of value. So for that, I would also say with anybody that's using AI daily, like I use, sometimes we forget to push back on it. Again, because it's so confident, you're just like, oh, it's going to take it. And sometimes when you do push back on it a first time, I find with these newer models, they actually push back on you. And this is where you kind of have to set this context and say, hey, I'm the one in charge. This is what I know. And then you have to kind of push back at it 2-3 times before it'll say, okay, I understand what you're trying to say. So this is where, again, for us, it becomes really important that we're building that not into just ourselves, but also into our teams and individuals within the organization. And this is one thing that I always try to keep, at the top of my mind is a lot of these I call them AI influencers. They'll always tell you, can AI first, right? Where companies want to be AI first, or can you do it with AI, right? So before you do any tasks, ask, can AI do it? I would also ask with the critical thinking aspect, just because AI can do it doesn't mean that the output is right. Have you actually pushed back on it and have you come up with the best solution? So I want to say something about the phrase of soft skills. I used it because that's what everyone calls them, but I think we need to retire that term because there is nothing soft about any of what I just described. These are hard skills, especially going into the future. They're hard to develop, they're hard to master, and they're hard to find. So I'd call them power skills because in a world where AI handles the technical, the analytical, and the informational, these are the skills that hold all of the power. So the future of the BRM is not just about keeping up with technology, it's about doubling down on the things that make us irreplaceably human, and then using tech to help to amplify that, not to replace it. Next slide, please. So this is the section, this is actually the last slide that we're going to be looking at today, where I really wanted to focus on the aspect of practical skills. So now that we've spent most of our time together today talking about the human side, and I did that intentionally because I think that's where the real conversation needs to be. But I don't want you to walk away thinking that I'm still ignoring the aspect of AI. That's not true. It's actually the opposite. I want you to lean into it because here's the thing. The better that you're able to understand AI, the better you can do everything I just talked about. If you understand how AI works, not at a technical level, but at a practical level, you can be the person in the room who knows when AI recommendations should be trusted and when they should be questioned. And that's the trust gap. You can't bridge that if you don't understand what's on the other side. So here are a few practical things I encourage every BRM to start to develop. The first one is to learn to prompt well. And I don't just mean learning how to use ChatGPT. I mean understanding how to frame a problem for AI in a way that gets you useful output. This is actually a skill that's really important for the future. It does take practice, and it's going to be fundamental as knowing how to write and also write a good email. So here I just want to take a couple seconds to talk about prompting and kind of the shift that we're starting to see within it. Just 1 second, sorry. So I always tell individuals, AI isn't going anywhere. It's like the internet. When we got the internet, we kind of had to learn on our own. All of a sudden we had Google and we had to go in and we had to figure out, all right, what are we going to write in our search to be able to get the answer? So in the past, let's say as a Habs fan, I would type in Habs game score. And we always kept our searches to a minimal, tried to keep it to a couple words, your keywords, and then we would get the results. And for those of us that are trained on that, prompting is the exact opposite. Where prompting isn't going to be 3 words, prompting is, it actually has a back end to it where, good prompts contain certain sections that you should include for the AI. And I would encourage you all to actually, after we get off this call, I could actually put the link into the chat where Google actually said that they're changing their search prompt. First time in 25 years, the prompt that used to be like, this small and you used to put your words into it is actually going to become longer now. And what they're starting to see is that they want you to search the way that you're prompting. And when you're giving your Google search the context and what you're looking for, the search is able to actually help guide you better. And so now the Google search is going to really act in an AI way. And it's almost like Google's disrupting themselves so that they could keep the user coming to Google. So this is where prompting is going to become more and more important, because that's kind of going to be our 3 words. Habs game score is going to be, can you tell me if the Habs scored, who scored, and what does the next game look like, right? Where all of a sudden now I'm putting in more context on what I'm looking for. On the back end, you have an AI, whereas before we had a list of links that would come up and you needed to click into the links to get your answer. Now an AI tool will be able to chat with you back onto Google. So again, it changes that context. So we need to know how to prompt well. And for myself, I could tell you in the past year and a half, I've actually picked up some really bad habits of prompting. And every time I put in a prompt and I get an output that I don't like, I'm always like, man, AI is not so good today, or this model sucks. Actually, anytime a model sucks, it's because you sucked with your prompt. You put in a bad prompt, and that's why the model did its best and gave you the best answer it could come up with. So this is, again, for us, prompting isn't going to be something specific to a role within an organization or a specific person. Prompting is going to be like searching, where everybody's going to be prompting, even if they don't know how they're prompting. With Google, back in the day, if you wrote a good search, you got good links and you got what you wanted the first time that you searched. That's the same thing with prompting. So that wanted to go a bit deeper into it so all of you really understand the importance of it. Next is the ability to build your data literacy. You don't need to be a data scientist, but what you need to be able to look at is, from an AI generated output, you need to be able to ask the right questions. Where did this data come from? What assumptions did the model make? What's missing? If you can't interrogate AI output, you can vouch for it. And if you can't vouch for it, you can't bridge the gap with the trust. Again, does this fall, data literacy, does the data aspect fall onto the BRM? No, it does not. But for anyone that's using an AI tool, we need to know about the data that the AI tool is coming up with for the answers. So this, again, I think it's table stakes where, all right, I'm using this model. What's the data? Is it data that's coming from the internet where all of a sudden a lot of people have different views? So the model is going to act differently. Is data coming from inside our organization? How trustworthy is that data? So on that aspect, you don't need to be a data expert, but you do need to have a good understanding of, all right, is the data private? Is it public? In what context is it? How much do I trust the data? A lot of times what we've seen in stats is when an AI machine acts a certain way and they make a certain decision, we jump on a machine faster and we say, oh, this is wrong. This machine didn't do something right. But that machine is making a decision, a prediction based on data that came from humans. So an example of this is, for instance, what example should I use? There's so many. So let's say if an organization was working within a certain bias. So what happened is, I'm not sure if I used this example last time, there was a not-for-profit organization and their HR team decided to use an AI tool. And there was an individual that actually applied for a job that they were perfect for, and they were rejected in the first round. And the individual actually bypassed the tool and went to an HR representative and said, hey, listen, I'm perfect for your not-for-profit organization. This is everything that I have. And why was I rejected? and the HR team actually said, hey, they looked at the human looked at the at the CV and said, hey, this is actually a really great CV and he is a perfect fit. Why did our tool reject it? And what ended up happening is the tool actually, based on all of the CVs that they've gotten in the past and the individuals they hired, the tool associated that an employee playing volleyball was the perfect fit for the organization. So if the tool didn't see volleyball as one of your hobbies or something into it, it had a higher rejection rate. And so this is where, again, AI is making a decision based on the data, and it's going to make it's able to predict certain stuff and put certain stuff together that humans never would. And this is where, again, we need to question that data. The next aspect is understanding AI's limitation. Know when it falls short. Know that AI still does hallucinate. Hallucinations have gotten better. It doesn't hallucinate to the degree that it did before when we started using a lot of these Gen AI tools. But stats actually show that we'll never get 0% hallucination. There's always going to be some aspect of hallucination within an AI tool. And this is where I would say we all have employees, coworkers that we work with, where some of them do tend to exaggerate a bit. You get a couple lies and stuff. So look at an AI tool in that aspect, right? So hallucinations will always be there, and know when it's confidently wrong. So because your organization needs someone who can separate the AI hype from the AI reality, and that person can be the BRM, where we actually say, all right, within this tool we're looking to use, what are our limitations, and start that conversation. We don't need to have the answers. We're not the experts. We're just kind of starting that conversation so people are aware of the limitations of an AI tool. It's not like a software tool that we've used in the past where, one input was always going to give you one output. These tools day to day can be very different. Even I have certain departments that use prompt libraries. So let's say if me and Tom worked in an organization together and we worked in a specific department, we were both working in marketing, and we had a prompt library. If he copied and pasted from our prompt library, the prompt, and I did it, I also copied and pasted the exact same prompt word for word, and we put it into our tool, there's no guarantee the output is the same. So this is where, again, we need to understand the limitations, and especially for individuals now in a lot of organizations, we're seeing that organizations that didn't adopt to AI, they're starting to really pick up where individuals want to use the tool and they don't know how to use it properly. And so this is where they won't necessarily understand the limitations of AI unless they're really told it. And last is to start exploring how AI can actually make your day-to-day work better. Use it to prep for stakeholder meetings, use it to synthesize feedback, use it to draft communications. Let AI handle the mechanical so you can focus on the human. And this is where it becomes really interesting, is if you don't use the tool, you won't be able to speak about the tool. There's certain stuff that you're only going to pick up by using it. And so this is where, again, I'm keeping this at a very high level on purpose today, because I'm actually working on narrowing this down. So this is where wanted to have this conversation with you all. And in closing, what I wanted to speak about is I want to bring it all back together. What do BRMs need from AI? We need AI to do what it does best so we can do what we do best. We need it to handle the data, the analysis, the summaries, the reports, so we can focus on the trust, the interpretation, and the connection, the stuff that actually moves organizations forward. We need AI to take the mechanical work off of our plate so we can step fully into the role that only we can play, the human at the center of it all. The person who builds bridges, the person who builds trust, the person who walks into a room full of uncertainty and they help people find their way. And last year I stood here and told you that relationships are at the heart of the AI success. And I still believe that, every word of it. So this year I wanted to go further. Relationships aren't just at the heart of AI success. Relationships are at the heart of everything. Every transformation, every strategy, every decision that actually gets made, and every initiative that actually gets done, it all comes back to people trusting each other enough to be able to move together. And that's what an AI tool can't do, is it can't bring that community, it can't bring that human relationship into it. So in a world that is becoming more automated, more algorithmic, more artificial every single day, the most valuable thing you can do is to be genuinely, irreplaceably human. And that is the future of the BRM. It's not a future where we're fighting against AI. It's a future where we're freed by it, free to do the work that matters most, free to be the people our organization needs most. And I'll tell you something, that's a future worth stepping into. And that is pretty much it. So thank you everyone for your time today. And if anybody has any questions or comments on what I presented, would love to open this up to have a conversation.
Thank you, Jasbir. That was enlightening. And it's, it, I think one of the things that struck me the most was the different gaps that you mentioned, the trust gap, the interpretation gap, the connection gap. And I've got a few questions written down here myself. I'm going to ask one and give you all time to either raise your hands or throw anything else into the chat. But something that I'd like to follow up on, I think it was on the connection gap when you said in about 6 to 12 months, you know, for example, organizations may start waking up to this connection gap that isn't existing, and that's where BRMs are perfectly poised to step into that. Apart from working on developing power skills, leveraging these practical skills and stepping into it, what can I do as a BRM to continue to get ahead of that, so when the organization is ready to come to me, or perhaps even stepping forward with additional information and jumping into it before that's a really felt gap?
For that, I think one of the most important aspects is to understand. So from a BRM perspective, we have our partners that we're working with, understand where they are in their AI journey, because that connection gap is going to be very different, right? If they're just starting off with their AI journey, or if they're scaling their AI journey, right? So how does that connection look like? Mariah, are you sharing your screen? Because I see myself.
I'm trying to do the gallery. That's okay. I know everybody.
Okay.
You might have
I'm
to hit
like,
stop sharing first,
I'm like,
Mariah,
man,
and
I
then go
really
into
speak
gallery.
with my hands.
Okay.
And I'm going to.
Does that make sense, Tom, from the connection aspect? Because in order to really understand that, we need to understand where the department is, where the individuals are in the way that they're using AI. And this is where it becomes interesting, because back in the day, it used to be a software where you can monitor the software being used. And with AI, it's not that, right? It's not one system or one way of using it. And so that's where it becomes even harder to leverage from a BRM perspective. And that's where we really need to up the human aspect of the game, right? To be able to get a better understanding. Because I have a lot of organizations that are like, all right, what KPI should I follow? Right? Like productivity, like a lot of times they're looking at quantitative KPIs, and a lot of AI right now has qualitative, especially with what AI can do now. So for instance, like if I'm attending a meeting and I can turn on my AI tool and it can record everything and send out a summary, right? There's some part of it that you could quantify, but all of a sudden it's also helping me do my job better, where I don't need to waste the time on it, right? And so that's where like it gets harder to monitor. And everyone wants a beautiful dashboard to say, all right, these are everything, the ROIs. And with AI, I find a lot of companies are having a hard time with that one dashboard.
What are some practical ways I can continue to gain visibility into other departments? Right, that is a part of the BRM role, but what might that look like moving forward?
I think it's making sure you're having that conversation to ask about it, right? So, hey, what AI initiatives have you started on? Or what are you thinking about? And I think a lot of companies, there's some departments that still have not started that conversation on what AI tool they can use, what it's capable of doing. I find last year there was still a lot of departments within organizations that were kind of built on fear, right? And they were kind of like, let me ignore this. And AI is not something that you can ignore. So this is where I find for BRMs, it's to have that conversation, bring it to the table and say, all right, so what's happening with AI? What's your strategy? What are you looking at? And then really getting an understanding.
That
Easier
makes a lot of
said,
sense.
easier said than done, like I said, right? Because a lot of times when you do have that conversation, the person could be like, I don't know. And what we're starting to see right now is leadership in some ways is lagging. And we see individuals that are using AI tools. So it's more of a bottom up approach than a top down approach. So before we would have a software where it would become a project, it was top down, right? This is our new software in the department, we're going to use it. Now all of a sudden we have, if leadership is rejecting AI, so let's say if they're rejecting a Gen AI tool, right? We have individuals that are still using it. They may not be upfront about it. So the department can't really, how do you say, be strategic in that aspect, right? So if I'm working in a marketing department, we're both working together, I'm using a Gen AI tool, all of a sudden, I wasn't the greatest writer, but now everything that I'm producing is written so well, right? But at the same time, it still sounds authentic because I'm prompting very well, right? So it's not just an AI input and an output that I'm providing you. I'm adding myself into that aspect, right? And then Tom, if you're not using a tool, right, that gap between myself and you is increasing too. And so this is where I think for BRMs to have a really good understanding with your partners within the business, right? All right, these ones are much ahead in their AI journey than these ones, right? And how that kind of looks. Make sense?
Absolutely. And to lean into that point, right? That gap that might exist between people who are able to use AI tools and who may not as much. The BRM also can step into this area and be a promoter of, hey, here's how you can leverage these tools. So not only learning, but also teaching. How do you see the BRM's role coming into play in order to just help raise everybody's ability or capability of using AI tools, be that from social connections, opportunities, just any thoughts there?
I do have a thought, and I hope Erin is okay with me sharing this thought. Like how we have the BRM role, I believe in companies, strategic companies, there is an AI BRM's role specific that can be created. Where right now, let's say, a BRM within the relationship context that we're starting to see that we can really step up, then there's a specific AI BRM that I see within organizations, and they're going to have to understand a bit more of the technical aspect of it, right? Where they'll need to know more about data. They'll need to know more of the difference between an AI, what an AI and a Gen AI tool can do, right? Because right now, a lot of companies don't have that, and that's kind of breaking their AI strategy. And that's why they're not able to really go into it, because AI at the end, it's not held by IT. There needs to be a business ownership to it. But business doesn't speak tech, and they don't have the credentials of an AI, right? To really understand it. And this is where I think it, like I'm like speaking at my company right now, and I want a BRM specific to AI to have that conversation. So this is where it's more of a technical and a separate, and I think that that's where companies are going to look at the gaps, and they're going to say who's going to fill that in, and I believe an AI BRM will be able to do that.
Makes a lot of sense. And we do have a question in the chat from Mervin as well. So I know we've kind of been focusing a little bit kind of internal within the organization.
So
Do
I
you go ahead.
love, Randy just made a comment. He goes, we have created an office of AI automation and aligned one of our BRMs with it. And that's exactly
Mm.
what companies need to do, is have that AI BRM. So Randy, absolutely agree with that. And companies don't have that model. And I believe that the BRM Institute is the one that can provide it, to say, all right, we have our BRMs where we do, you know, the work that we've always been doing. Now there's a specific AI BRM.
Love that recommendation, and glad to see, Randy, that your organization is leaning into that. So I do know with 5 minutes left, I think this will be the last question, and I will ask Mervin's. He said, are you seeing patterns or trends regarding AI use or advancements between different industries?
You know what? This is where I find industries and organizations are just where I'm seeing a lot of ad hoc, where, you know, before you could find kind of what's the industry trend and you could jump on it to say, all right, you know, this, our industry is doing XYZ. And now, depending on the adoption internally of AI, that's where the organization is heading. So I find I don't see as much industry trends as much as I see within organizational trends. Does that make sense?
Mm,
So
absolutely does.
we could go into, like, maybe in the next year and a half, there's going to be fundamental AI usage within industries, right? Where, all right, they could use like marketing. Right now, I think any marketing team that doesn't have a writing assistant, right? But that's table stakes that's going to become. Yeah, and this is where it becomes harder now from an industry perspective to see that trend.
Thank you for that, Jasbir. And I know there is an additional question, and we might have more. So my question for you then is, how can people get in contact with you if they have additional follow-up questions?
I'm on LinkedIn, and so anybody could just let me, like, send me a message, connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any follow-up questions. And also, like, I'm always around with the BRM Institute. So I think if anybody has any questions, you could always go through the Institute, and you guys know how to get in touch with me, right?
Absolutely. Well, any last words of wisdom on your mind before we depart?
For me, I hope the one thing you guys took away from the webinar is that the ceiling is, you know, growing. And I want all of us to step into that. I don't want to be held back by fear. Fear was like 2024, right? Where we're like, oh my God, AI is coming. All right, let's be fearful about it. I really do believe that from a strategic perspective, BRMs are fundamental to how organizations are going to move forward. And this is where we get to really define our role in what aspect of it that we're going to play. And I really want all of us to step into it, right? So all of a sudden, like, these soft skills, you know, before they were soft, now they're not soft anymore. And we can really leverage them and say, hey, listen, these are the gaps I'm seeing. This is how we need to step in. This is what we need to do. Organizations are going to get a lot more human going forward than technical. So in the past, we had software that came out, tech that came out, organizations went tech. Now that AI is able to do a lot of this stuff, organizations need to go back to human. And that's what's going to really make a difference. And this is where I'll say the BRM role is the most fundamental for organizations to really move forward into their AI strategy and really be a difference maker within their industries.
Thank you so much. And thank you as well, everyone, for joining this webinar today. Feel free to follow the link in the chat to sign up for more webinars coming. BRM Connect's coming up in September. Really looking forward to that. And just as always, appreciate all of your time, attention, and wish you a wonderful rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.